have a microphone somewhere that I can, right up there, that I can pass around to everybody. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Redford. If you can explain to our audience how you became interested in this topic and who brought it to your attention and why did you decide to make a film about it?
Well, I think issues of health are just, I mean, to get it right out there, you know, health, my own personal journey in life, I understand what it means to struggle with health issues, and that was really the start of my interest in documentary filmmaking. I did a film called The Kindness of Strangers about organ donation because I'm a 2-time liver transplant recipient. Glad to be here, you know. And I saw that the story about organ donation was off-kilter and needed to be recast, and that was my mission with my first documentary, to recast the discussion. And I saw just enough results from that effort to whet my appetite to continue in this idea of, like, you know, the issues of health and environment and education. So all of that to say, fast forward to about 6 or 8 years ago, I met Karen Pritzker, who's a Chicago native. I mean, you know, I call the Pritzkers the American Medicis because, you know, of what they've done as a family. And we both shared dyslexic children. And the conversation that started with my wife and Karen led to a film called The Big Picture that recast dyslexia in a new light. But the recasting and addressing the myths and misconceptions, the most powerful thing at the core of that film was that it was based on science, medical science, specifically MRIs, functioning MRIs. So Karen, after that, to her credit, sent me the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and I read it and immediately thought, this is just the most overwhelming, profound piece of research I'd ever read, because it was so far-reaching and yet complicated and challenging that it led us to make two films. One that was more verite, specifically focused on what it looks like to be trauma-informed as an educator and school administrator. But then this one we really saw as a helpful tool to explain and define what toxic stress is and point to some of the solutions, because it is so complicated, you know. So this is more of an educationally based, grassroots screening-based film meant to really be a helpful tool to those in the public sector and otherwise that are really looking to introduce these fresh ideas about what it really means to take care of our kids at risk.
Good, thank you. And Dr. Adam, I think, you know, when we saw I loved the part about Miss Kendra and the intervention in the preschool. And you are involved in interventions as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your research and the things that you're implementing?
Sure. I've spent a lot of my career measuring adverse experiences and their impact on stress biology, and finally realized that it's time to get down to interventions and actually trying to change stress biology and promote positive outcomes. So there's 3 interventions I want to briefly mention. One is a quiet time intervention, which is a mindfulness-based intervention in schools, in Chicago public schools and New York public schools. Over 6,000 kids will be involved in the intervention, and the school systems have set aside 15 minutes twice a day for kids to meditate during school hours. They're trained in those techniques. And we're going to look at behavioral outcomes, we're going to look at biological outcomes in those kids, and we're going to look at their grades and their health outcomes. So we're really excited. That's just getting off the ground. The other intervention that I've been working on is called the Stronger Sleep Study. We didn't talk a lot about sleep in the film, but sleep is a powerful regulating influence on biology, and it's also a system that really responds to stress, as anybody that's had a tough period in their life can attest to. It really affects sleep. So I've designed an intervention where we attempt to educate kids and families about sleep, and then also we use a text message based system to promote earlier and also more regular sleep hours among kids, and that's something else that helps to calm and regulate the biology. And then finally, there's, I think, one ACE missing from the list that I've recently been doing a lot of work on, and that's racial discrimination and exposure to racial discrimination. And I have a 20-year longitudinal study where we've seen really profound effects on biology and health outcomes and also educational outcomes. And so the other intervention that I'm involved in is promoting positive racial ethnic identity among kids, basically increasing their positive sense of self around their race, ethnicity, and we're going to be looking at whether that changes their stress biology in positive ways and also improves their academic performance. So those are three, but there's a wide array of really wonderful interventions out there that are being worked on.
That's fantastic, and I had to chuckle during the sleep thing. I have to tell you, my son just turned 24 this week, and I was talking about sleep and how he hates going to bed early, even at the age of 24, because I made him go to sleep at 8 o'clock. I was an evil, horrible mother. Thank you, Jonathan. My next question is for Judge Erickson. You see the effects of high ACEs, unfortunately, with criminal activity in adulthood. Can you share a little bit of what you've seen in the criminal justice system and what you think might make a positive difference?
Yes. First of all, having been in the state's attorney's office and a prosecutor for about 15 years, and then being on the handling a felony criminal call for about 20 years, it's very clear to me, and I think it probably is to virtually everybody who works in the criminal justice area, that the people that we see in court, accused of crimes, convicted, sentenced to probation perhaps initially, and then to prison, these are damaged people. And I think that it was interesting to see in the film that there was there was quite a bit of reference to adults dealing with high ACE scores, and certainly I think it would be great to move into the area of individuals who are sitting in county jails, sitting in prisons, or on probation, and do a lot more than what we're currently doing as far as identifying their ACE scores, their underlying problems, and dealing with those problems. I happen to be fortunate enough to be in Kankakee County, which most of you know is about 60 miles south of here. You might have driven through there on the way to Champaign, perhaps. But we have a pretty progressive sheriff. And in our local jail population, we instituted about 3 years ago a program called Thinking for a Change. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an 8-week cognitive therapy program. And the prisoners will actually be disappointed if their time is running short in terms of, are they going to be released from the jail. They want to finish this Thinking for a Change program. And we have graduations in the jail. The other judge who handles felony cases in Kankakee County, she and I both go to the graduations, and I can tell you that it makes a tremendous difference in the lives of these inmates. And the system, the prosecutors see the same thing. So what's happening is that the inmates that participate in that program are, they're getting rewarded. I mean, maybe instead of 36 months probation, it's 30. Maybe instead of a 6-year sentence, Department of Corrections, it might be 5 years, or task or something like that. I wanted to emphasize just how significant the adverse childhood experiences are in the inmate population that I see, and not just inmate, but I mean people on bond as well. So I just picked out a couple of examples, if I could take the time to share this. When we sentence somebody in Illinois, we have what's known as a pre-sentence investigation report prepared by probation. And that goes into their family history, it goes into their background as far as alcohol and drug abuse, it goes into their educational background, it goes into any psychological problems they've had. And I just wanted to share with you, kind of quickly, 2 of them I picked out. And I think at least one of them is pretty representative. this is confidential, so I'm not going to give you anybody's actual name, but I'll call this person Ken. And think about the ACE score that Ken has. When I saw Ken in 2013 for sentencing on a possession of controlled substance, he was 40 years old, and he'd been to prison 5 times, mostly on drug charges. He had begun to drink alcohol at age 9. His father had given him his first drink. He started smoking marijuana at 9, and he stole some from his father. By 14, he was using drugs nearly every day. He began to use heroin, and he ultimately was selling heroin mostly to just raise money to buy his own drugs. He had been born out of wedlock, he said. His mother was forced to leave because she was white, his father was black, and so there was family pressure. She left. He didn't see her. He said he talked to her one time when he was 12, and otherwise he had no contact with his mother. His father wanted to teach him the way to be tough, and so he beat him. He abused him emotionally and physically. He said between the ages of 7 and 17. His grandmother was a stable source in the home. His father abused his grandmother, but his grandmother died of a heat overdose in the home when he was 13 years old. He left school in 8th grade. He did get a GED. He also joined a gang, and he said he had left the gang, but he still had the respect of the gang in prison. He suffered from asthma. Mentally, he said he had no issues because he said to himself, I love me. He went to prison, and you can just see, to me, what jumps out from your film is the possibility of intervention with the father, who, was sort of a mixed bag of helping and harming, but possibly something could have been done there. But I guess that's the one I've taken enough time doing that.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
If that's representative, that's
extremely
scary.
Representative. I could give you much worse cases. Usually, because 90% of our cases, and this is nationwide, are plea negotiated, normally we don't get a chance to sort of dig in and find out what's going on with somebody. It's only when we have a sentencing hearing. But that's when you really find out. You kind of you look inside and find out what's going on. And the case I just gave you is very representative.
Well, that brings us now back to kids then, in childhood. And you've been in the education system for a long time and seen all aspects of child development. And I'm guessing that you've been aware of high ACEs for quite some time, probably before it was even labeled as being ACEs or toxic childhood experiences. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen over the years, how you've seen maybe changes in awareness, and how that's going to affect our kids and maybe not ending up in Judge Erickson's court?
Well, I do wish I could tell you that I had heard about this study years and years ago. I've been in this world for a long time. But actually, I didn't know about it until about 2.5 years ago when my brother, who's in the audience, who's a pediatrician, was at my house and in an informal conversation started to talk to me about ACEs and toxic stress. And my first reaction was, I was like, why don't I know about this? That as an educator for so long and now working with 133,000 educators across this country, why wasn't this shared with people in schools? Because we knew it was happening. Every teacher realizes that there are kids you can't reach, that there are kids, no matter what you do, the problems seem bigger than what you can deal with in a classroom setting. And when I found out there was actually science to explain that, I said, educators need to know about this, and then we also need to share the good news about that there are things that we can do to mitigate the effects of toxic stress. So really, IEA, Illinois Education Association, we partnered with the Pediatricians Association, ICAP, and with many others, and we just started, our first goal was awareness, because we found out that lots of our people across this state knew nothing about this survey. And I could, just sort of, hypothesize about why that is. And so one piece of it is that if you're aware of what's going on in educational reform, that emphasis, as was said in the movie, it's been all about no excuses. Academic press, you can do this. The focus has been on the teacher and the school and everything and testing. And this idea that there might be something else going on, I think some of the powers that be thought, well, educators are going to use this as an excuse, because then we let them off the hook. And so I think that's part of the problem of us getting the message through. So we've really worked really hard. We partnered with Jim Sporleader, who's the principal at the school in Paper Tigers. We partnered with a production company, and we have had, probably 100 screenings of Paper Tigers across this state, just building awareness. And then the next step that we've also started doing is helping educators figure out what they can do in their classrooms, in their schools, their districts, and their communities to bring all the pieces together and all the information to really help our kids, which will actually get the results that our policymakers are looking for, which is more academic achievement. But we have to pay attention to this whole child, and the revelation that we can't do it by ourselves, educators can't do it by themselves, is a really welcome message to teachers. And this has resonated with them in ways like we have never, ever really had before, to be honest.
That's fantastic. I'd like to open it up to the audience now. I'm not sure if I need to take my glasses off so that I can see something.